promises us that his church, the Orthodox Church, will be led into all truth. For some scriptural backing of that, Father Nathan, would you read the scriptures that follow right there? And then we're going to go into the actual service itself.
Sure. The words of Christ himself, howbeit when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth. For he shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall hear, that shall he speak. And he will show you things to come. John 16:13. Matthew 16:18-19 reads, And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And below, Christ states that one should not neglect what the church has to say. In Matthew 18, verses 15-20, Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee one or two more, that in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as an heathen man and a publican. Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Again I say unto you, that if 2 of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them.
So, fathers, we see right here in the scriptures Christ establishing his church, his priesthood. And he's telling his church that he will guide it into all truth. The Holy Spirit will come. God himself will guide the church into all truth. And he's also telling his apostles that if, somebody has an issue or a heresy, a wrong belief, if one of you address him, try that, then 2 of you go, and then the church itself. But if he will not listen to the church, let him be as the heathen or a publican. So we see here a scriptural basis for what we're about to talk about is the Sunday of the Triumph of Orthodoxy. And Father Maximus, let's go into that. So first of all, let's touch on the scripture, though. I believe Christ is making it clear that the church is, as St. Paul says in 1 Timothy 3:15, the pillar and foundation of truth. Would you agree with that based on?
Absolutely, because if I didn't, I would be anathema. So,
right, exactly. Yeah.
I think it's important that the term anathema, again, has become in cultural, modern cultural society, sort of a joke word. We would often see it maybe in movies or television shows spoken by some kind of fanatic or lunatic. Anathema has a very definite, precise meaning. It has an ancient meaning. It's a translation of a word that occurs in the Old Testament in Hebrew, and it's the Greek translation in the Septuagint of the Hebrew word herem, which signifies something devoted to God, often through complete destruction. For example, in Joshua 6:17, Jericho and its inhabitants are declared anathema, meaning they are irrevocably given over to divine judgment. So the understanding is anathema is a statement originally from the Greek. It means to offer up, to cut off. The pagan understanding was this would be done to some deity, whether it was neutral. It could be for honor or for destruction. So the understanding, ultimately, this term anathema means we're giving it over to God.
Right.
Because people by their belief have transcended or violated our ability to make a judgment there. So it is not. We are actually not stating unequivocally that the person who is anathematized is necessarily going to hell.
Right. We're not necessarily cursing them.
Right. It is. I mean, it has come to mean. It's certainly not a positive thing in our connotation, but it's essentially we're saying if you believe these things, or consequently, it's the negative version of the gospel.
Okay.
Because the gospel says you have to believe this. We're saying, okay, if you don't, or if you do believe these things or don't believe these things that are in error, then you're cut off.
Right.
It's not, and how do you change that? You just don't believe those heretical things. So it is like we were saying earlier, it's like a doctor. You go into the doctor's office and he says, you're sick, you need to lose 50 pounds and quit smoking cigarettes. And you can argue with them. You can say that's a bad diagnosis, but he's not saying it to harm you. He's saying it to help you. And the church is basically saying, if you believe these things, these erroneous things, you have cut yourself off from the church.
So you separated yourself. Father Nathan, add on to that. You were about to say something.
I just wanted to point out, Father Maximus pointed out that it was in a negative form.
Right.
Who believes these erroneous teachings is anathema, but the service of the anathemas, which you served just this past weekend, starts out positively affirming, here is what we believe. And we read the protodeacon, or in your case, probably the abbot, recites the Nicene Creed and says, "This is the faith of the fathers. This is the universal faith of the church."
In the version
positively.
In the version I have, you do the anathemas, and I guess this maybe is a Greek version of it, and then at the conclusion, you say, "This is the faith of the fathers." Right. So it's an understanding. They work both ways, but it's an understanding that this is what will separate you from the faith of the fathers, from the faith of the apostles, etc.
Fathers, this is why I put the Vespers text there that Father Deacon read before, because Father Nathan's right, actually, that we're giving the theological reason for why, and specifically this is coming during the time of iconoclasm, right? So why was the church having to deal with this problem? Was it a lot of people will say, and a lot of Protestants will say, a lot of popular YouTube commentators out there will say that icons are, they're an innovation of the church. We did not have them before the church. This is a common argument that you hear among especially Protestants. But it was well known that even in the Old Testament that there were, holy images. Colossians says that Christ is made in the image, in Greek, that is icon of the Father. The Word became flesh, as it says in John 1. So this is something that, the church has understood. We could depict God, right? We could touch him,
in a particular way after the incarnation. The Old Testament, these were commands by God, and these were symbolic representations.
Right.
In a way that the icon is more of a actual. I mean, Jesus had hair and eyes and and a face, and so we're able to depict him in a literal way. And that tradition, our tradition, it goes back, the first iconographer is St. Luke. Right? St. Luke did an icon, or three, I think they say, 3 icons of Theotokos during her lifetime.
One of which is in Moscow to this day.
Yeah, and I think the other one I think there might be one in Cyprus. I'm not exactly sure.
So if we take out icons, Father Deacon, we're essentially taking out the Gospel of Luke. So we're taking away the Christmas story. We're taking away the prayer of the publican. We're taking away the book of Acts. Is that essentially right?
With the same logic, that we are applying to, the Protestants are applying to icons, you can say the same thing to the Bible, right? We have to get rid of that too. But even historically, we're seeing that there is precedent for iconography and for this depiction of God.
Right.
So it's erroneous to say that that's just not Christian tradition.
Right.
Yeah, and it shows their theology, because if you reject iconography, you reject the capacity to make icons. You're rejecting, the fathers understood, you're rejecting the full implications of the incarnation.
And what are the full implications of the incarnation? We've talked about this in other classes, but it's said by many saints, St. Athanasius says it in the incarnation, that God became man so that man could become God by grace. Right. But still, we're to be like God. In Genesis, it says we're made in the image and the likeness of God. So take us back to what's happening in the church right before the Seventh Ecumenical Council.
Fathers might have some historical data. Not really good at remembering historical data, but for about 100 years or so, there was influence from outside the church, from primarily the Muslims, with help of Jews that lived in the empire.
Right.
And they had an understanding, an Old Testament, their interpretation of the Old Testament understanding, and of course the Muslims as well, that it was idolatry and that we were idolaters. and the leadership of the empire for a period of time was more interested in having good relationships with the Muslims than they were with proclaiming the truth. So they slowly, the first thing they did in the churches is they took the icons and they put them high enough, like the icon over there, or that people couldn't venerate them. So they were still in the church. And then slowly they got to the point where they actually whitewashed the churches and removed them.
Wow.
And one of the heroes of the theology of iconography is St. John of Damascus.
Yeah.
Interestingly, he was able to write freely because he was living under the Arabs in Damascus.
Right.
But then they found out that he was, not one of their friends, and they did some terrible things to him. So historically, that's what happened. And then I believe it was the Empress and her son restored the icons, and they literally walked back in and put the icons which had been hidden and put them back up in the
Quick
church.
shout out to Xenia, who I know is watching. One of the things that I asked for my family for Christmas was the icon of the three hands of the Theotokos.
Right.
And it was St. John prayed to the Theotokos after his hand was actually cut off, right, by his...
It's right-
yeah, exactly.
it's right
Yeah,
there.
fantastic.
It's right there,
And it's just amazing that the Mother of God works miracles for these saints.
It also demonstrates very clearly that iconography is not something that's secondary.
Right.
It's essential. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that one of the traditions of Orthodoxy on this Sunday of Orthodoxy is for children to bring their icons from
Yes.
home to the church, and following the Divine Liturgy to process around the church carrying these icons, just as the icons were brought back into the churches after the emperor and the empress restored Holy Orthodoxy. And this is a beautiful tradition, and I witnessed it for the first time this past Sunday. I did, since it's not common in the Russian churches,
Right.
and here we have a number of Greek and Antiochian traditions.
What do the Russians do on that day?
Anathemas.
Anathemas.
But they usually-
curse heretics, Masons.
Wizards.
We'll get to that in one
Yeah.
second. Yeah,
But
wizards and druids.
My understanding is that's primarily done in cathedrals and monasteries. Is
That's
that done
correct.
Is it done in the parishes? No.
No, abbots and bishops.
Right. That's my understanding.
So yeah, here.